right, guys. So this is one of those rare occasions where I comment on something that is under an ongoing investigation. And the reason that I'm doing so is because no one was seriously injured and because there's been so much interest in this story. There's so many things that's written in the mainstream media which is factually incorrect or that they've just misunderstood, that I thought that maybe you guys deserve to have my side of the story. So basically what happened was that there was a Delta Airlines flight, the 777-200, that took off from LAX in Los Angeles and was bound to fly to Shanghai. And they had a completely normal departure up to about 8,000 feet. And at around 8,000 feet, they called air traffic control up, said that they had a problem with engine surges, as in with compressor stalls on its right-hand engine, and that they wanted to declare a mayday and return back to LAX. What they were talking about, a engine surge or a compressor stall, is something that I'm going to do a full proper video about. But to understand it, you have to understand that inside of the engine you have a compressor compartment that does exactly what it sounds like. It compresses the air prior to it reaching the burn chambers. And those compressors are basically small wings that are aligned in a row and that compresses the air. Now, under certain circumstances, if you have, for example, had a bird strike, or if there is icing inside of the engine or something else that's building up on those compressor blades, they can stall, just like a wing can do. And when they do, they start building up pressure. So because the air that's supposed to push back using those wings cannot do that. So it stops at one part of the engine, and that rapidly builds up a pressure. And that pressure can only go forward, it can't go backwards. So what you will hear is a series of what sounds like explosions, like this, which is also referred to as an engine swan song. But even though it sounds really bad, now sometimes you can even see flames shooting out through the tailpipe, it's not as bad as it sounds or looks. In fact, in most cases, we can just reduce the thrust on that engine, and by reducing the amount of fuel, reduce the overall suction in the engine, there's less pressure building up, and the engine stops. And that seems to be what's happened on this flight as well, because they reported that they had gotten the compressor stall to stop. Right. So this is not great for the engine. It can, if it is allowed to continue, it can damage the engine badly. But if you do your memory items from reduce your thrust and you stop it, it's not that bad. You might actually be able to continue using that engine, but at reduced thrust. So it's not one of those critical malfunctions. So what about fuel dumping then? And why was it used on this occasion? Well, this is quite fascinating actually, and if you want to have a really, really good explanation about what fuel dumping actually is, well then check out Captain Joe's video that he did, I think 2 years back about it. It's very, very good. But the easy way of explaining it is that these big kind of long-haul aircraft, like the 777, like the 747, for example, they are built to carry an enormous amount of fuel, as in hundreds of tons of fuel. This 777 had, it reported it, to be about 212 tons of fuel in it. So when the aircraft has that much fuel in it, it's very, very heavy. And during the takeoff roll, there's not too much G-forces or stresses being put on the landing gear or the structure of the aircraft. So it can be very heavy and still take off. However, if that same aircraft want to come back again and land, well, in that case, it is just too heavy to take the stresses that will come from, you know, a proper hard or a normal firm landing. So because of that, you have a much higher maximum takeoff weight than your maximum landing weight. In the case of a 777, I don't know exactly the figures, but it can be several tens of tons of difference between the maximum takeoff weight and the maximum landing weight. Normally that's never a problem, because they fly these long intercontinental routes, they burn off all of this fuel, so when it reaches the destination, it's not an issue. However, if they have, like it happened here for the Delta Airlines flight, if they have a problem just after departure, well then they haven't been able to burn any of that fuel, so all of that weight is still there, and they don't really want to come in and land with that, because they could be, even though they are designed to be able to take the stress from those overweight landings as well, there could be damage to the landing gear, for example, or other structures. So I would guess that there's quite heavy maintenance inspections needed after a severe overweight landing like that. And because of that, close to this big international airport, there are designated areas where these big aircraft can go out and dump fuel. And they tend to be out of the sea or over a very low populated area. And the rule is that you cannot dump fuel below 6,000 feet. The reason that you can't do that is because the way that this happens is that when we dump fuel, and I should also point out that not all aircraft can dump fuel, like the 737 that I fly, we cannot dump fuel. That's because our maximum landing weight is fairly close to our maximum takeoff weight. It's only about 10 tons. In this case, it's not really an issue. But if we were to dump fuel, we open up valves that lets the fuel out into the airstream. And when that happens, the fuel hits the air that rushes by at maybe 200, 250 knots. And that airstream just smashes the fuel droplets into teeny tiny little drops that, because the fuel is very volatile, evaporates almost immediately. Okay? So if we are up at 6,000 feet or above that, and we start dumping fuel, in that case, there's not going to be anything that comes down on the ground. It will still be there in the atmosphere. It's still not good for the environment, and it's definitely not something that the airlines want to do. The airlines are actually buying the fuel, so dumping fuel is a last resort. But if it needs to be made, that is done in designated areas at a high altitude to avoid the direct environmental impact that it will have. Okay. Now, what would happen if we dump fuel on lower altitude then? Well, if we dump it at lower altitude, the droplets will still be kind of smashed, but they won't have time to evaporate. So they will fall down onto vegetation or onto the sea, or in the case of this flight, onto these elementary schoolyards where kids were playing around, playing soccer, or having a good time. Now, the fuel is not toxic, as in it's not going to cause any significant damage to the people involved, providing that they clean it off fairly quickly, but it's not great. I mean, it includes things like benzene, for example, which is quite toxic. You don't want to inhale or drink or get some of that in the eye if you can avoid it. But there's also other additives added to the fuel, which are there to fight fungi, for example, or bacteria that can build up inside of the fuel tanks or in the engines otherwise. So all of these things combined, the jet fuel and all of these additives, it's not good, and especially not for plant life and vegetation, which I'm sure that they're probably going to see in that area quite soon. So why did this happen then? All right, why did these pilots decide to dump the fuel? Well, first of all, this is impossible to know. This is going to be a full investigation now, and I'm sure that once that investigation is concluded, we will know more about what the pilots were thinking. But generally speaking, if you have some kind of engine failure or engine problem, you have the option to just return back to the airport. And this is what these pilots asked for. When air traffic control asked them if they needed to go and dump fuel, they say negative, and they asked for vector back for immediate return. And that could be an indication that the flight crew thought that this was a fairly serious problem with the engine, and that they wanted to get the aircraft down as soon as possible for the safety of everyone on board. All right, this is a possibility. But then during the vectors back into LAX, well, then something very curious happened, and that is they started to dump the fuel without telling air traffic control that they were doing so. And the reasoning behind this, it's going to be up to the commander and the first officer to explain, but it is likely that they realized that 212 tons of fuel, almost a fully tanked 777, was a little bit too heavy for comfort. So they started the fuel dumping maneuver anyway. And I also want to make it clear here that a fuel dumping is not something that happens by accident. This is a full-blown procedure. There's several steps that needs to be followed. Those steps will be shown on the lower DU on the 777, and the switches that are needed to be switched on in order to initiate the fuel dumping are guarded. So it's definitely something that they did on purpose, and the only purpose you have for doing that is to lower the landing weight. If you start fuel dumping on a 777, it can shed between 1.4 and 2.5 tons per minute, and it will probably be the higher value now since they had so much fuel on board. If you, by the way, if you want to see a step-by-step discussion about the flight and, you know, in a really professional way, I highly recommend you to check out the Blanco Lirio channel. He's a guy that does great explanations of these kind of things, and in this case he also is using another channel which is a favorite of mine, which is called Vasa Aviation, where you can see the plot of the flight together with real-time ATC, and it explains a lot when you actually get to hear it. So check out the Blanco Lirio channel. I highly recommend that. So, what is likely to come out of this then? Well, anytime that there is something like this happening, there will be a formal investigation to it. Now, fortunately, this aircraft landed without any incidents. There was no one hurt on board the aircraft. There was people that were injured on the ground, as in, you know, emergency personnel had to come there and help them. And Delta Airlines have tweeted out that they've been during the night there and helped clean the area to make sure that there will be as little environmental impact and as little danger to anyone around as possible. It is probably just going to be seen as a nuisance because it is, yeah, it's like a fuel spill. Effectively, that's what it is. But once again, a fuel dumping should never happen below 6,000 feet. So there has been someone who has made some kind of judgment call here, and it's going to be up to the flight crew, like I said before, to motivate why they did it in this way. And it's going to be really, really interesting to hear the reasoning behind it. Now guys, if you like me commenting on current events like this, I am aiming to do more of that on the Mentor Pilot channel. But if you want to be in and discuss this with me and other aviation professionals and just aviation enthusiasts, come into the Mentor Aviation app chat, right? We have forums where we discuss, like this for example, and it's completely free to download. So you have the download links down here. I want to send a huge thank you to the Patreon crew as well. So you guys, you know who you are. The Patreons are the ones that are enabling me to make these kind of videos. Especially on short notice where I need to take time away from maybe my family or from my normal work to investigate and to research a video. Well, then it's my Patreons who are helping me to do that. So a huge thank you to you. And if you want to become part of my Patreon crew, well then use the link up here. I would love to see you there. You'll be able to preview my videos, and you'll also be able to, if you're on the $10 or more level, schedule a Skype call, and we can have a kind of a one-to-one discussing what your targets and your goals are. Now, remember, Berlin, the Pilot Expo, on 21st and 22nd of February. I hope to see as many as possible of you there. Have an absolutely fantastic day, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Right, guys, I really hope that you liked that. If you want more content like that, more aviation content, well then, check this out. I hope that you have subscribed to the channel and that you've highlighted the little notification bell. See you inside of the Mentor Aviation app, and have an absolutely fantastic day. Bye-bye.
Temukan kebaikan baru di sini. Sekarang total lemak dan gula kurang dari 10% total kalori. Total sodium kurang dari 650 mg. Semuanya nggak lebih dari 600 kalori. Nikmati kebaikan baru Happy Meal.
Hi everybody, very welcome to Mentor and yet another video podcast. As always, I hope you're doing absolutely fantastic. Today on the video, guys, we're going to be talking about the Airbus automatic takeoff that we all saw last week. Is this the beginning of the end of the pilot occupation as we know it? Stay tuned.
31016, everyone right, put on. Third line, 31 right. Delta 26, reduce.
Right, so I bet that almost everybody of you have seen the video that was released last week of an Airbus A350 that took off out of Toulouse with 2 test pilots and 2 engineers on board. Now, the aircraft took off from a runway completely by itself. We could see in the video how the pilots kind of nervously just had their hands on the joystick, and the only thing that they did during the whole takeoff maneuver was to set takeoff thrust and then eventually select the gear up. The aircraft managed to track the centerline completely by itself. It took account for crosswinds, it did rotation exactly what it's supposed to do, and it started flying away. So this is part of a project that Airbus calls ATTOL, and it stands for Automatic Taxi, Takeoff and Landing. Now, those of you who are paying attention knows that the aircraft of today already can fly automatically during climb, cruise and descend. So if you add taxi out, takeoff, landing and taxi into that, it means essentially that an aircraft could be transitioning from the gate back to the gate again and do all of the flying part by itself. So is this the beginning of the end of our occupations as pilots? Well, no, not if you are to trust Airbus on their word anyway. So what Airbus is saying is basically that ATOL is one of the many projects, and I'm going to be telling you a little bit more of some of their other projects later on, that is aimed at kind of working towards the solution of future problems in the aviation industry. They know that in the future it's likely that there's going to be much more aircrafts in already congested airspaces and on airports with very, very high traffic density. And the fact is that they also know that we, the pilots, have some limitations. Now, pilots are extremely good at decision making when it comes to gathering information, deciding on what the best course of action is and actually executing it. Very few other systems, including the computers of today and the kind of artificial intelligence that we're looking at in the foreseeable future, cannot match humans, right? But what we, the pilots and humans in general, are not very good at is working well under stress, and especially if there's a lot of auditory input, so a lot of sounds, a lot of visual inputs, a lot of smells, a lot of everything like that. If we become saturated, we will start to miss things. And if we are, for example, in a very, very busy airport and we're taxiing out, well, then we are prone to mistakes. And you can see this every year by literally hundreds of incidents where pilots misjudge the distance between the wingtips and another aircraft and end up tangling, either driving it into the tail of another aircraft or into the wingtip of another aircraft or even into buildings. So what Airbus is saying is that by continuing to work on automation, even during the taxi phase and during the takeoff phase, they will be able to let the pilots concentrate on what's going on outside, judging external threats, coming up with good solution to potential problems, and leave some of the actual handling of the aircraft to the automation. So air traffic control, for example, could be telling the aircraft to taxi to a specific holding point and be absolutely sure that the computer on board will be following the taxi route, while a human today could misinterpret that information, could take the wrong taxiway, for example, or, like I said, taxi into an obstacle. Now, the technology that was used is also kind of groundbreaking. So while we today, normally when we're using automated systems, we rely on external information, for example, GPS information or the instrument landing system, the ILS, which is an external radio transmitter, which the onboard computers kind of interpret in order to follow the localizer and the glide slope down towards the runway. This system is using a visually based system. So there are cameras outside that is, in this case, looking for the centerline marking and the touchdown zone marking. And then that information, that visual information, is fed to a computer where an algorithm is interpreting what it sees into how to kind of deflect the rudders in order to make smooth corrections back onto centerline in case of a gust of crosswind, for example. So this technology is not dependent on an outside system. It's completely contained inside of the aircraft, which is a good thing, especially if you are going to start taxiing around an airport, for example, where these external systems like the ILS system might not work, and also for automatic landings and takeoffs. Now, what you will need though is very, very good markings, because it's using only the kind of, the white lines of the touchdown zone marking and the center line marking in order to navigate itself. And if it doesn't see them good enough, well, then it will not be able to maintain the center line. So what Airbus is also saying very, very clearly is that they see the pilot as being absolutely essential to the system. So the pilots are going to be the ones who takes the decision to, for example, reject a takeoff. They are going to see, potential obstacles or potential threats coming much quicker than a computer can do and intervene. So the A-Tool system is not a system designed to replace pilots, at least not yet. So what other things are coming up? What other things are Airbus working on then? Well, the fact is that Airbus is actually working on a number of different kind of projects based on the potential problems of the future. Now, one of them is called Fellowfly, which is a really fascinating project utilizing the same kind of technology that Mother Nature has been using for thousands of years. If you've ever seen birds migrating, you would see that they fly in a kind of V shape. Now, the reason because they're doing that is because they're using the vortexes of the bird in front of them in order to minimize the drag for the bird flying behind. And what Airbus is saying that using technology, using the kind of automation that they're looking into, you could potentially set up aircraft to fly in a similar pattern, where maybe 5 or 6 aircraft would be flying in a V formation from A to B, rather than flying by themselves, thus decreasing the fuel amount needed with maybe as much as 10 to 15%. So that's a really, really interesting project, which I'd love to follow. Another project is a project called Connect, and Connect I haven't got my full grasp on just yet, but it looks like Airbus is looking into the work patterns of the pilots, especially on long-haul routes, to optimize the pilot monitoring role depending on what phase of flight they're in order to get the level of fatigue down, in order to enable the other pilots to rest, for example, and one pilot to full attention during certain phases of flight. Like I said, I would love to know more about that. So if you're working for Airbus, you're free to contact me, okay? But the project that maybe I see as the biggest threat to our future as airline pilots is a project called DISCO, which stands for Disruptive Cockpit. And this project is Airbus' version of replacing the co-pilot with a single captain and a digital assistant, like a computer that will be helping him or her out, and potentially also another pilot sitting on the ground as a flight dispatch. Now, I don't have full insight into this project. I know that it exists. I know that Airbus is working on it, and it is part of their way to tackling the future lack of pilots. There is forecasted to be a lack of pilots in the upcoming years, and Airbus is saying that all of these projects that they're working on are aimed to tackle things like efficiency, like safety, obviously, connectivity, but also the future lack of pilots. And of course, the only way that you can kind of tackle a lack of pilots using automation is by replacing pilots with automations. But having said that, before you freak out when you hear this, I've also done a video about whether or not we will be replaced by robots. You can see it up here. It's a little bit old now, but essentially there are many, many, many steps in between the technology being able to get rid of one or even both of the pilots until it can be implemented into real life. So don't worry. What Airbus is doing at the moment is not aimed at taking me or you out of the cockpit. It is aimed at taking some of the workload away from the pilots, which is what we're using automation for already, and to enhance safety, efficiency overall. So the A-Tool project is, in my view, a very positive thing. I'm looking forward to see what we will be able to do in the future using this kind of technology. And if you guys are interested in discussing these kind of things, if you want to talk talk about current events in aviation, or you just want to talk with fellow maybe aviation enthusiasts, or maybe you're a nervous flyer and you want to talk to a real pilot before you get on a flight, well then make sure that you get the free Mentor Aviation app, okay? You have the link down here. I'm just about to go in there and go into the chat and talk a little bit. I do that every day. And, you know, it's completely free to download, to use. You get news from there. Whatever's happening in the aviation industry, we make sure that it comes to the Mentor Aviation app first. But if you really want to be part of the app and get as much as possible out of it, well then consider becoming a premium member. If you do so, you'll be able to ask me questions during in-app live streams that I do every week, a couple of them, and you'll be able to see the CVs of other users, and also you'll be able to access special videos, kind of behind the scenes stuff that I do only for the app and only for my premium members. So go down, get the app now, and I'll see you inside of the chat. Have an absolutely fantastic day, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Right, guys, I really hope that you liked that. If you want more content like that, more aviation content, well then, check this out. I hope that you have subscribed to the channel and that you've highlighted the little notification bell. See you inside of the Mentor Aviation app, and have an absolutely fantastic day. Bye-bye.
Buat lawan tantangan, aku harus fokus. Kalau buat lawan ketombe minyak dan gatal, pakai Clearman Triple Anti Dandruff Power. Sikat habis ketombe, minyak dan gatal. Segar maksimal sampai 48 jam. Lawan tantangan, jadi kamu versi kamu. Clearman.
Hi everybody, very welcome to Mentor, yet another video podcast. As always, I hope you're doing absolutely fantastic. Today is a special video because we're just hours away from the first ever flight of the Boeing 777X. What is a test flight? What is that little cone that's hanging behind the tail of the aircraft? And what should you be looking for? Stay tuned.
Wind 31016, everyone right, right on right. Start to land, 31 right. Delta 26.
Right guys, so the reason I'm doing this video is because we have a lot of discussions inside of the Mentor Aviation app where people are asking loads of questions. Why didn't the 777 take off yesterday? Why do they have to take that specific runway? What is that thing that's hanging behind the aircraft, and why don't they take the gear up? So what I want to do today is I just want to tell you a little bit about what a test flight actually is. So what you have to understand is that a test flight is actually not the beginning of the test program, okay? A test flight is needed because it's part of the process to certify a brand new aircraft. Now the 777X is supposed to be a brand new aircraft seen in the eyes of the FAA, which is the authority that's going to, you know, allow it to fly. But the test flight and the whole test program is basically based on 3 different phases. You have the preparation, which is what's been taken years and definitely the last few months to do. You have the execution, which is the test flight that you're going to see, and which is going to be referred to as a test point by the flight engineers. And then you have the evaluation and the data collection, which comes afterwards. So these 3 points is what Boeing is doing at the moment, okay? You would have seen over the last year or so that they have done a lot of testing of the 777X already. So there's been testing that they've done on the ground inside of hangars. One of them I did a video about, which was the ultimate load test that they did. They will have done taxi testings up and down the runways, up and down the taxiways to see how the aircraft is performing. And while they're on the ground, they will also test most of, you know, configuration, for example. How do the flaps extend? How do the rudder move when the pilots are inputting things onto the controls, so on, okay? But of course, the first flight is very, very special. It's the culmination of maybe a decade of work for the whole engineering team. It's a very emotional thing for a lot of the engineers. It's likely that you're going to see grown men cry today when the aircraft finally takes off. But what you have to understand, guys, is that the first flight is just that. All right, it is the first time that the aircraft actually leaves the ground, and they're going to try to make that as little complicated as possible. Okay, so on board of this 777X, you're going to have 2, potentially 3 very qualified test pilots. Now, test pilots, they are pilots who have special training to do this kind of flights, okay? They will have, normally they have military background, even though that's not a requirement, but they will have extensive knowledge about very similar types, probably the 777 or other similar types, and they will have done a special course on how to actually do test flying, all right? So it's not just a pilot taken off the line. These are people that know exactly what they're doing and the risks that are associated with actually flying an aircraft the first time. Now, when I say risks, the risk on a type like the 777X are very low because the kind of computer modeling that Boeing has to use now are extensive. Right, there are very, very good models of how this aircraft is going to perform when they take it for the first flight. It was a completely different thing back in the day when they only had like very, very simple wind tunnel testing, and the first time the aircraft flew, it was the first time they actually knew how it was going to perform. Here, the test pilots have a good idea about how it's going to perform. It's likely that they've done quite a lot of simulator flying before with all of the computer models that they have, so they pretty much know. But anyway, you need to have special training because they will go through a test program which is extensive, and it's going to bring the aircraft to the absolute limits of what it's supposed to be done. And why do they have to take it to the limits then? Well, part of the test program is to verify the computer models that they've had, but it also is there to find the test points to build the operational handbook of the aircraft. So when I, for example, will be flying this aircraft in the future, then I'll be able to go into a manual and I'll be going to look at diagrams to see, for example, how the aircraft performs if I want to fly it with the gear down, or if I want to fly it with the flaps out at a certain altitude. Well, then, you know, I can just go in and I can just look in the handbook and see, okay, so it will take this much fuel, or it will glide this far, or so on. All of those test points comes from the test flight program. Right, so that also goes for example, how many G-forces can I take out before the aircraft stalls? At what speed does it stall? How does it actually perform when it stalls? All of these things, someone, the test pilots, will have tested out. But that brings us to this first flight and what you'll be looking for. So, on board the aircraft are not only the pilots, there are also going to be at least 2 flight engineers, okay? These engineers are sitting in the back and they are taking in loads and loads of data. Everything that the aircraft does during the taxi out, during the beginning of the takeoff roll, the first feet over the runway, as it's climbing out, all of that is being recorded. And what are they looking at then? Well, they're looking at things like, for example, the external pressures of the aircraft, so the static pressure, the dynamic pressure in different parts of the aircraft. And here, by the way, is where that little cone that's trailing behind the tail of the aircraft comes in. That cone is called the trailing cone pressure transducer. All right, try to say that 5 times quickly. And it is exactly that. It measures pressures at that point. And because it's sitting there where it's, you know, hanging just at the tip of the rudder and behind, it's actually a uniquely good position for taking, you know, certain pressures. I don't know exactly what they're called, but that's what it is. It's a pressure monitoring unit, okay? So, as the aircraft takes off, the flight engineers and their computers are going to be taking in things like static pressure, dynamic pressure, different pressures at different parts of the aircraft. They're going to be looking at vibrations. They're going to be looking at how the aircraft actually handles as the pilot's inputs, control inputs, how is it actually responding. They will be looking at things like how the engine is performing, how much fuel is it using, is it causing any vibrations, is there anything like rudder flutter, for example, or anything like that that's appearing that they didn't count on. Because no matter how good these computer models are, there is always a possibility that the computer models have missed something, and only real flight testing with real air can show exactly how the aircraft is going to perform and if there are any issues. And this, by the way, is why they will be doing this with the gear down. Okay, and that's because as they keep going with their flight testing program, they will be expanding the envelope more and more. So the first few flights is going to be in the low speed regime. So that will be in the takeoff configuration, flight with gear down, and then coming in the landing configuration. They don't want to do anything more than what's in their testing program, because anytime that they do more, there might be, a risk of something going wrong. And of course, taking the gear up and then finding out that there is an issue with the gear and having to land with partial gear up on its first ever flight in front of thousands of press cameras and you guys watching the live stream would be extremely embarrassing as well. But the main thing here is that they want to test each system by itself. So you'll be taking off, you'll see them flying away with the gear down, they'll be flying out into a test area where they'll be doing some predetermined maneuvers to check all of these things that we've been talking about, and probably thousands more that I haven't mentioned. And then they will eventually come in and land and taxi in. That's what they will do in the beginning. And then for each test flight, they are going to expand this. They're going to make it fly a little bit faster. They're going to be taking the gear up, and then eventually they will be going into maneuvers like, for example, steep turns, stalls, overspeeding of the aircraft, handling during extreme crosswind, handling in Arctic conditions during extreme temperatures, both high and low. And the test program can take months, if not years, to complete. But in this case, since we're dealing with an extension of a pre-existing type, it's likely to go a little bit faster than that. So that's what you can expect, guys, from this first flight. And that's why they're flying with the gear down. And that is what that little cone is. And this is what I wanted. I wanted you to know what it is that you're actually looking at when you see this fantastic, huge aircraft taking off for the first time. Now, if you have more questions, or if you just want to hang out with more aviation enthusiasts as this live stream is going on, I would really love to see you inside of the Mentor Aviation app. We will be putting the live stream up inside of the app, so you'll be able to see it from inside of the app, and then you can go into the chat and you can ask questions to other pilots like me or Ava or any of the other professional pilots in there. There's thousands of aviation enthusiasts who are in either the forums or the chat every day, and you can also get your absolute banging fresh aviation news inside of the app. They will be pushed out to you if there's something that's really important. Otherwise, you can just go in there daily and check out what's going on. We're finding aviation news from all over the globe, and we're putting it into the app for you guys to be able to access. Now, let's see how this aircraft performs, shall we? Have an absolutely fantastic day wherever you are. And if you like this kind of things, these kind of updates of what's going on in the aviation industry, make sure that you've subscribed to the channel and that you've highlighted the little notification bell as well. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you inside of the app. Bye-bye. Right, guys, I really hope that you liked that. If you want more content like that, more aviation content, well then, check this out. I hope that you have subscribed to the channel and that you've highlighted the little notification bell. See you inside of the Mentor Aviation app, and have an absolutely fantastic day. Bye-bye. Hi everybody, very welcome to Mentor and yet another video podcast. As always, I hope you're doing absolutely fantastic. Today on the video, guys, what's up with Boeing? Yesterday, they posted their first annual loss in over 2 decades. Today, we're going to be looking back in history about what Boeing was as a company, what has changed inside of the culture of Boeing and has led up to the current 737 MAX debacle. We will also ask ourselves, is David Calhoun, the new CEO, the answer to the questions they seek? Stay tuned.
Wind 31016, we're on exit, on ramp. Clear to land 31. Delta 26, 1600, dude.
This video is brought to you in cooperation with NordVPN. Now, if you're like me, you spend a lot of time on public Wi-Fis, maybe in hotels or in airports or in restaurants. And if you do, your data is at risk, all right? There are people who are out there scanning the networks to try to get your password or to scan your browsing data. And you need something like NordVPN to keep you safe. Maybe you're also, like me, wanting to see your favorite Netflix show without these pesky regional restrictions. So if you use this link here below or the coupon code PILOT, well then you'll get 70% off the normal fee of NordVPN, and it comes down to only $3.49 per month. So check it out and let me know what you think about it. Boeing right now has just announced its first loss in 2 decades. Back since 1997, they have had annual profits up until this year. And obviously, it has to do with the huge debacle surrounding the 737 MAX and the 2 fatal crashes that happened last year and the end of 2018. In order to understand this, and also in order to understand all of the press that has been out about a toxic culture inside of the Boeing company, we need to go back a little bit in history to see what Boeing used to be and at what point this has changed. I have based a lot of the things I'm going to say in this podcast on research from multiple sources, and I've put some of the links to the sources, including all of these emails and all of the documents that was released by Boeing, in the description of this video. So if you want to check it out for yourself or listen to the brilliant podcast Business Wars, then go down and check it out, all right? Back in the heyday of aviation, during the 1960s and 70s, Boeing was basically a big family of engineers. The engineers was creating fantastic aircrafts like the revolutionary Boeing 707 or the Boeing 727, or even the iconic Boeing 747 that is still one of the greatest aircrafts ever built. And it was built by engineers, to a certain extent, for engineers and for the traveling public. And Boeing didn't really care that much about development costs. The reason for that was that the airline industry was regulated. This meant that airlines were given certain kind of routes that only they were allowed to fly, and they were also given quite a lot of government money to pay for things like aircraft purchases or research and development costs. So that meant that Boeing could spend enormous amounts on kind of solving engineering puzzles, making sure that they could make the coolest, best aircrafts around. And if it became too expensive, well then that cost was just passed down to the airlines. The airline could increase the ticket prices because they had no competition, or the states could jump in and pay for some of it. Okay, but that was back then. During the 1980s, President Carter and Reagan decided to deregulate the airline business. And they did so because they realized that with a little bit of competition, it's likely that the prices would come down for the end consumer. And it did. But it also came with the consequence that the airlines needed to start looking after their costs. And since the airlines needed to do that, they needed to start looking for the most cheap aircraft to buy or the most cheap aircraft to run. So during the 1990s, this started to become a problem for the likes of Boeing, which had huge costs, and their income was starting to kind of dwindle a little bit. There were also new competitors on the market. See Airbus, that was starting to kind of really show their ambitions during the 1990s. So around 1996, the then CEO of Boeing, Phil Condit, felt that something needed to be done. He started to work on cost cutting within Boeing itself. So trying to make Boeing become more slim as an organization. But he also wanted to diversify the business model a bit. Boeing was very big when it came to commercial aircraft. They had about 60% of the market. But in second place came McDonnell Douglas, which had about 35% of the market. And only in third place came Airbus with a measly 5% of the market. So Boeing thought, what about if we go in and we try to buy McDonnell Douglas? Not only would that be kind of a feather in the hat for Boeing to finally be crowned the king of American airplane makers, but also McDonnell Douglas had something that Boeing desperately wanted, which was a lot of military contracts. If they could get that, it would mean that they could rely on the solid income from the commercial airplane market when that market was going up. And as that was going down, since it's a very cyclical business, they could rely more on the defense strategy, on the military contracts. So all said and done, in 1997, Boeing was allowed to buy McDonnell Douglas, which had been struggling for years. And all the Boeing employees kind of assumed that when Boeing bought McDonnell Douglas, well, then the Boeing philosophy of great engineership, of great attention to detail, would persevere. That would be the culture that would come through, and the McDonnell Douglas kind of slightly different attitude would just be absorbed into Boeing. But that's not what happened. In fact, what happened was that a lot of the senior management inside of McDonnell Douglas was actually taken into senior roles in the Boeing organization and started to take over. So the philosophy in McDonnell Douglas, which had been much more about shareholder value, about cutting costs wherever you can find, that now started to find its way into higher level management within Boeing. It went so far that at the time, around the shift of the millennium, there were employees in the Boeing company that thought that the managers of McDonnell Douglas had actually managed to buy Boeing with Boeing's own money. That's kind of like a standing joke that was going around. So in 2001, something very, very important happened. And this is a sign of exactly that shift in management philosophy. So in 2001, Boeing decided to move its headquarters from Seattle, where they were close to the people that were on the ground, the engineers, where they could hear kind of by the water cooler what was going on. They decided to take the management team and move it to Chicago. Now, I cannot overemphasize how important that decision was for the organization, because what happened now was it opened up a geographical void between the people on the ground and the management teams that were taking the big decisions. And whenever you have that, whenever you get a disconnect, you get a disconnect in communication. So maybe the small things that were happening on the ground, problems with a new aircraft type, for example, or just engineers having an issue that they don't really like something, would now not be communicated as easily up to the people making the decisions. And during the 2000s, this kind of change in culture just kept growing. Boeing became more and more focused on shareholder value at the expense of research and development, R&D. And it started to kind of percolate a general sense of annoyment between the workers, the people who had to actually build the aircraft. And this became, this is the reason why this kind of release of documents of internal communication became so interesting, because there you can really, really see how people are talking about their projects and how frustrated they are with the lack of communication and lack of listening from the senior management team. So during the 2000s, Boeing became less interested in creating new aircraft types and more interested in just sucking as much money as they could out of existing types. In 2011 came the next really important kind of watershed moment. In the beginning of 2011, the Boeing management team went out and said that they didn't foresee any need to create any new single-aisle aircraft type for the next decade. They were happy with their 737NG and their market share. But the same year, in I think it was June 2011, American Airlines released a real bombshell. they announced that they would be choosing the Airbus 320neo for a huge aircraft order covering hundreds of aircraft. And that was a real shock for the Boeing management. Remember, they had said that they didn't foresee any need to any redevelopment of the 737 or any new type of 737 competitor. But what they saw was that the reason that American Airlines had gone in and bought the A320neo was that the Airbus team had been able to just fit new, more effective engines on the already existing aircraft, on the aircraft frame that they already had. Because if you look at an Airbus and you compare it to Boeing, you'll see that the Airbus is much higher up. It has much bigger landing gear. And that was because, Airbus engineers back in the day, they realized that it's likely that these higher bypass engine types are just going to become bigger and bigger and heavier. So they built the Airbus 320 in order to accommodate future engine types. While the Boeing was built back in the 1960s, where they didn't care about how much fuel the aircraft was using. And they built it in order to be able to, ground handle as easy as possible, to be able to fly into secondary airports. So the old 1960s airframe of the 737 just was not made to be able to accommodate these huge fuel-efficient engines that the Airbus A320 could. That's why American Airlines bought them, because, they were more competitive than the 737. That's it. When Boeing realized this, they also realized that, okay, so we do need to do something about the 737. How can we, as cheap as possible, create an aircraft that can compete with the Airbus 320neo? The answer to that was from the engineers was, well, you can't really. You have no ground clearance. You need more landing gear. We can't use the existing landing gear. But Boeing wasn't really into the idea of redeveloping a brand new aircraft type. It would take them probably over a decade to do recertification, and it would require a new type rating for any pilots that were supposed to fly the new aircraft type. So what they said was basically sort it, fix it, get the bigger, better engines onto the 737. That led to the new LEAP 1 Bravo engines that are fitted to the 737 MAX being moved a little bit up and a little bit forward. And when they did that, the kind of aerodynamic characteristics of the 737 changed, which meant that they needed to do something, a software fix, in order to create the same feel to the aircraft as the old 737NG, because otherwise the pilots who were supposed to fly it would have to be retrained in a simulator before they could fly the MAX. And Boeing did not want that. They wanted to both eat and have the cake at the same time. Whenever you have a software fix to an engineering problem, you have to make sure that it is a very, very well-built software fix. And this is obviously where this whole 737 MAX problem has come in. Because these crashes that have happened last year highlighted the fact that there were some big flaws in that software fix in the MCAS, the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System, that is now being fixed, and this is why the aircraft is sitting on the ground. But here you can see how a failure that was unearthed last year has kind of tails all the way back into the 1990s. There is another problem, which I haven't gotten to yet, and that is, of course, the role of the FAA in this. Because even though a company like Boeing might start to kind of, lose their way, there should be a regulator in the end who stops any faulty engineering solution from ever being certified. But what happened back in 2003 was that the American Congress started looking into cost cutting as well on the FAA side. And they said, why don't the FAA kind of delegate some of their oversight onto the aircraft manufacturer itself? While back in the day, before 2003, there would have been designated engineering representatives, DERs, who would go in and do the certification work. Well, after 2003, there was a designated organizational authority instead. So instead of having people, as in designated engineers, who would come in and be an expert in certifying certain parts of the aircraft, the organization itself was designated, in this case, Boeing. So they could then choose which ones would be presenting the facts to the FAA. This changes the balance from being the authority that is the one that goes in and actually checks something, until the organization, which are the ones that are reporting what they will need to report to the authority. So you see, that is essentially what eventually led to the kind of lack of oversight when these initial mistakes had happened. So, David Calhoun, is he the right man for the job? Well, that remains to be seen. I personally want to wish him the best of luck, but I also want to highlight the fact that David Calhoun has been part of the management team for Boeing for over 10 years. So it's not a fresh kind of breath of air into the company. In fact, he was a chairman of the board of directors during this decade when all of the decisions regarding the budget, time frame of the 737 MAX was set. So you have to understand that the CEO is not the one that is solely kind of running the company. The CEO is set there to execute the vision of the board of directors. So the board of directors, if they tell the CEO that this is how we want things done, the CEO has to do it that way. And David Calhoun was part of those board of directors. Okay, so if there is a shift in culture needed in Boeing, then David Calhoun needs to be aware that he is now in charge of changing that. And as late as in the autumn of 2019, he actually said that he didn't think that there was any cultural problem in Boeing. And that shows a bit of a disconnect in that communication that we were talking about before. So what do I think then? Well, I think that Boeing, in order to become or to change this cultural drift, they need to make sure that communication is working properly with the people on the floor. If someone on the floor, if someone on the engineering team sees something that they think is a potential problem, there needs to be a very clear kind of line of sight communication channel all the way up to the higher management team, and they should be able to communicate that without feeling any risk of being pushed aside because they're saying something that is not cost effective, for example. So communication is going to be really important, the same as transparency, which he's already talked about. And I also think that they need to review the whole company's view of the regulator. So instead of trying to push the regulator around to get them to where they want it, they need to kind of reassess the fact that the regulator is actually their boss and not the other way around, and listen very carefully to what the regulator is saying. And the regulator need to be, having a lot of authority being given to them from the likes of Congress and above. So that's it, guys. That's what I had for today. I hope that you found that interesting. If you have questions about this, as always, go into the Mentor Aviation app and discuss it. I want to send a huge thank you to the sponsor of this episode, which is NordVPN. Like I said in the beginning of the episode, if you want to make sure to safeguard your data when you are using public Wi-Fi's in hotels and in restaurants and airports, well then use NordVPN. They have a great service that has, I think, over 5,500 different servers all over the world, which means that the data transfer is really fast. You will not get any lagging when you're using them, and you can even use the services in China, behind the great Chinese firewall. So those of you who want to avail of this service, check out the link here below, or the coupon code PILOT, and you'll get 70% off the normal fee of NordVPN, which comes down to only $3.49 per month. So check it out, and as always, let me know what you think about the service. Have an absolutely fantastic day, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Right, guys, I really hope that you liked that. If you want more content like that, more aviation content, well then, check this out. I hope that you have subscribed to the channel and that you've highlighted the little notification bell. See you inside of the Mentor Aviation app, and have an absolutely fantastic day. Bye-bye.
Oxyfit. 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 Oxyfit baru, vitamin D3 1000 IU, penuhi kebutuhan vitamin harian dengan Oxyfit. Dexa.
Hi everybody, very welcome to Mentor and yet another video podcast. As always, I hope you're doing absolutely fantastic. Today on the video, guys, are you under a bigger risk of being infected with things like viruses, like the coronavirus, when you're out flying an aircraft? What is up with the recirculation of the air? How does the air conditioning system actually work? And also, if you stay tuned, you'll hear my story about when I was quarantined back in 2003. So stay tuned.
Wind 31016, everyone right, right on in. Start line 31 right. Delta 26, start due.
This video has been made possible largely because of the help and support of my Patreon crew. You guys are absolutely awesome, and I'm so grateful that so many people are deciding to support the channel. Now, if you're sitting out there and you think, I want to support as well, well then, check out this link up here. You can choose to donate as little or as much as you like, but I use my Patreon crew not only for financial support of the channel, but also to get ideas, like the idea for this video, for example, or feedback on thumbnails. You get to preview my videos. And if you are at the $10 per month or higher, you will also become a premium member of the Mentor Aviation app. So check out the link, and a huge thank you to those of you who are already part of the crew. Okay, guys, unless you have been living under a rock for the last 2 weeks or so, you know that there is an absolute media frenzy regarding the novel coronavirus of 2019. This is a virus that started off probably in a food market in the town of Wuhan in China. And it's spreading very quickly and very rapidly within China, and it's also started to pop up all over the world with death toll starting to rise. Now, the coronavirus is a virus very similar to the common kind of flu that we tend to get every year. It's just a little bit more contagious and a little bit more deadly, at least from the initial report. Now, having said that, I really want to emphasize that the deadliness of this virus is very much in line with previous similar outbreaks. Okay, we're going to get to that later on. But the way that this virus spreads is also similar to a common flu virus, as in it's normally spread by bodily fluid. So if you sneeze, for example, you will spread little droplets, and inside of those droplets can be the virus. Now, the virus will sit in those droplets, which will be suspended in the air for a few minutes, where someone could breathe it in, or they're going to fall down onto surfaces, and on the surfaces they seem to be able to survive and be contagious for a couple of hours. So, would that mean then that since the air inside of an aircraft is being recycled, that you are more likely to become infected by a virus like the coronavirus if you're flying in an aircraft? Well, in order for you to understand that, you need to understand how the air conditioning system in an aircraft works and what kind of air that you're actually breathing. So I've done a video about the air conditioning system. If you want to see more of the details about it, you can check out the link up here. But what you need to understand is that the air that you're breathing inside of the aircraft is being brought in from the engine, from the compressor stage of the engine, the 5th and the 9th stage. It's then going through several valves into a air cycle machine, which will take away some of the liquid content, some of the fluids, like the water vapor, for example, out of it. And then it's being brought into what we call a mix manifold before the packs are sending it out. Part of it, the left pack, into the cockpit, and right pack into the passenger zones. Now, in the zones, you guys will be breathing into this air, right? And whatever you do, if you're sneezing, if you're farting, whatever you're doing, that is then being picked up and it's being sucked out and it's being recycled again. And here is where people are freaking out. They're saying, well, what if someone sneezes and it's just being recycled over and over again into the passenger cabin? But this is also where all of the misconceptions are. Because the air that's being recycled, the reason that it's being recycled is to take a little bit of strain off the packs. Okay, so it's to be able to use less of the bleed air in order to give you something to breathe. The air is then being sucked out, and it's going through a filter called a HEPA filter, which is high efficiency particle absorbing filters. These filters are made to absorb anything that's in the air that's bigger than 0.3 micrometers, and they are efficient up to about 99.95%. Right? So they're extremely efficient filters. These filters are very similar to what you will find in, for example, hospitals. So the air inside of the cabin is actually as clean as the air as you'll find in a hospital environment. But of course, they are really, really careful because there's a lot of sick people in there. And another reason why you don't need to freak out about the air inside the cabin is because it's also being replenished at a very high rate. So generally speaking, the air is being completely renewed inside of the cabin about 20 to 30 times per hour. So every 2 to 3 minutes, you will be breathing completely fresh air. And that's much more both filtered and freshness than you would get in almost any other place. You are more likely to contract the virus because of the air quality in your office building or in a train station, or when you, well, maybe not when you're walking outside, but anytime that you're in a confined space, the air quality in the aircraft are actually very high. So I just want to really emphasize that. Now, some of you will say, well, I always feel like I'm getting a cold when I'm getting onto an aircraft, or I always sneeze more than I would normally. And that has to do with another thing. Remember how I told you that the air that was taken out of the engines are going through an air cycle machine and the water vapor is being taken out? Well, that process, together with the fact that there's very little water vapor to start with when you're up at cruise altitude, makes the air in the cabin extremely dry. So if you have a bit of a cold, it's likely that the dryness of the air is going to make it tickle more in your throat, in your sinuses, and in your nose than it would be at sea level with normal kind of moist air. But actually, that has a positive point to it, because the dry air is actually not conducive to spreading viruses. The drier the air, the less risk of spreading viruses. So the dryness of the air, even though it might feel very uncomfortable, is actually better, so you're safer, okay?
Nginep sekeluarga pakai tiket.com murahnya bikin yakin. Diskon hingga 50%, ekstra diskon hingga Rp475.000 untuk banyak pilihan hotel dan villa. Buruan pakai promo Mid-Year Holiday Deals. Buktiin sendiri deh murahnya.
Now, if a person sneezes, the water particles will move about 6 to 8 feet. So that means that anyone that's in the two rows surrounding the person who sneezes are at risk of breathing that in. Of course, the air cycling through the HEPA filters cannot stop direct impact from the water particles. So people are asking, should we be wearing face masks? And the answer to that is, yeah, face masks can be a good way to stop the virus from spreading to you. But a far bigger and more important thing to do is to keep a good hand hygiene, right? It is to have some alcohol gel, some of that cleaning gel for your hands with you if you don't have access to running water. And if you do have access to running water, make sure that you clean your hands properly with soap for up to 20 seconds before you eat, for example, or put your hands in your mouth for whatever reason. So good hand hygiene. Use one of those masks if you want to, but the reason that those masks tend not to be so effective is that people tend to put their hands inside of the masks to scratch themselves, whatever, and whenever you do that, you're still taking a potential virus in towards your mouth, or if you are infected with it, you're actually spreading it onto surfaces that you touch. So I know a lot of people take with them little kind of wet wipes to wipe the area where they're sitting. That could also be a good idea. But generally, if there's one thing that you should be doing is cleaning your hands, right? Keep your hands clean. So what would happen if you are traveling from a region that there is a known case of the outbreak. So let's say that you're flying from Wuhan and into to another place. What if the flight crew or the cabin crew notices that someone has the symptoms on board? Well, this is quite fascinating. So the cabin crew have ways of dealing with sick passengers. Normally, there's only one cabin crew that will be dealing with sick passengers so that not everyone is involved. They can be using gloves, they can be using face masks. And this is something that we've seen throughout the world now. Different airlines are tackling this differently. Some crew will be using masks all the time now because of the increased risk. But they will be finding out what's wrong with this person. So asking them about their age, their symptoms, if they've had any previous problems, where they've been, things like that. And they will be passing that information on to the flight crew. We will be writing down that, and then we will be contacting a person on the ground. If the passenger needs, for example, medical attention or an ambulance, we will be telling them about that. But also we'll be passing on the symptoms. And the reason for that is because the people on the ground, which is the Center for Disease Control in the US, or Port Health it's called if you fly into the UK, for example, they will be assessing where is this aircraft coming from and is there anything that we need to watch out for. And if I've been flying out of Wuhan and I'm coming in and I'm reporting that there's a passenger on board who's showing signs of the flu with high fever, for example, well then it's likely that this aircraft is going to be quarantined. You're seeing reports of that happening even to cruise ships nowadays. But I have actually myself been in a situation where I have been quarantined. And that happened back in 2003 when the SARS epidemic was on. Me and my captain, I was the first officer at the point, was flying from a destination, I can't remember which one it was, in southern France. And then we were flying back to London. During the flight, our cabin crew came in and said that we have a passenger on board who is vomiting and she's showing signs of the flu. Now, we didn't connect the dots then. We didn't think about it. So we just contacted Port Health. The passenger had asked to get some medical attention when we got down. We contacted Port Health, said, listen, we have a passenger on board. She's showing signs of the flu. Can you ask for a doctor when we arrive? But we didn't even tell air traffic control that we had a medical emergency because it wasn't a medical emergency. But anyway, after we did that, suddenly we started getting these really good directs, as in direct routings that you never get. Normally you fly a very long arrival route into London. In this case, we just got a direct towards a 10 miles final into runway 23 in Stansted. Didn't think much of it. We talked a little bit about maybe they misunderstood, maybe they've been told that there's a medical emergency on board, but we didn't understand. So we flew, came in, landed, and after we landed, we were flanked up by 2 fire trucks, one on each side of the aircraft. And this is where we started to kind of connecting the dots, thinking, it's the SARS epidemic. The SARS epidemic had very similar kind of news coverage as what you're seeing around the coronavirus today. We were taken to a remote stand, and we were told that the aircraft is under quarantine, do not let the passengers disembark, and we were allowed to open the forward door, and in came a medical professional that went down to the passenger, interviewed her. So that medical person very quickly established the fact that the passenger actually had a cold, but she had also eaten some seafood, and she thought that might have been bad seafood that was causing the vomiting. So they could quickly rule out SARS as being the reason, and we only had a ground delay of about an hour before we could disembark all of the passengers and get on our way. But it goes to show to what length the authorities are willing to go to make sure that that they're not, that passengers and crew and cargo are not being transmitted into a country and potentially spreading the disease. So what are the airlines doing then? Well, the airline industry is going to be heavily affected by this. We have seen this happening before, so back in 2003 with the SARS epidemic. There was a huge financial impact to the airlines, especially to airlines flying into the affected countries, so Asia and in general and China in particular. But it tends to be a very overgoing, like it has an effect for a few months and then it kind of resides. What the airlines are doing to kind of protect their crew is that they can allow the cabin crew to wear face masks, in some cases even hazmat suits. Have you seen those huge suits? And that will be primarily when they're evacuating passengers out of the affected countries. But we can also disinfect the aircraft. So on a regular basis, an airline would disinfect the aircraft maybe once a month or even less than that. That is a procedure that we're doing when there's no passengers on board and they're going around spraying a special aerosol that is there to not kill viruses, because killing viruses is very hard, but it's spraying something that will infect the DNA of the viruses, effectively stopping them from being able to reproduce and spread. So that's being done, and while on a normal operational schedule, that would happen, like I said, maybe once a month or even less than that. If they're operating in and out of countries or destinations that have a known occurrence of this disease, it can be done after each flight. Okay, so I've seen videos about some airlines showing on Twitter that they're doing this in order to calm passengers down. Now, the disinfection is different than disinsection. I know that if you've been flying into Thailand, for example, or flying from one tropical destination to another, you might have seen the cabin crew walking through the cabin with these aerosols, spraying it out into the air. Now, what they're doing is they're spraying something that kills bugs, primarily mosquitoes. And that's to avoid mosquitoes carrying things like the Zika virus or malaria to spread from one tropical region to another. So that's what you're seeing, and that's perfectly okay to be in the cabin as they're spraying that. It's to kill mosquitoes. Viruses, similar outbreaks. So what I would like you to do is please follow the World Health Organization guidance on this. I'm going to link to it down here. I also want you to just think of things like, washing your hands properly. By all means, wear a face mask if you're going out into public places, things like that. But do not panic. All right, just follow the guidance that your government is sending out to you, and I think that we're going to come out on the other side of this just fine. Before I go, I want to say again a huge thank you to my Patreon crew. Right, you guys are absolutely awesome. The way that you preview my videos, come with feedback on videos, working as a kind of a foolproofing system to make sure I don't say something stupid, and helping me with thumbnails. Everything is greatly appreciated, and of course the financial security that you're providing with me and my family and my company is greatly appreciated. So if you're sitting out there now thinking, I like the kind of content that this dude is doing, well then check out my Patreon crew. There's a link down here where you can go and you can donate as little or as much as you want, but it's all very appreciated. And like I said, if you go for the $10 per month or above, I will also give you the premium membership inside of the Mentor Aviation app so that you can ask questions during live streams and things like that. So without further ado, have an absolutely fantastic day, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Right, guys, I really hope that you liked that. If you want more content like that, more aviation content, well then, check this out. I hope that you have subscribed to the channel and that you've highlighted the little notification bell. See you inside of the Mentor Aviation app, and have an absolutely fantastic day. Bye-bye. Hi everybody, very welcome to Mentor and yet another video podcast. As always, I hope you're doing absolutely fantastic. Today on the video, guys, Airbus has just become the world's biggest aircraft manufacturer. What stopped them from completely eating up Boeing, now that Boeing is kind of down and under because of the 737 MAX crisis? How does it actually work if you want to go and buy an Airbus 320 today? Stay tuned.
Wind 31016, everyone right, put on right. Cardinal line 31. Delta 260, reduced.
This video is brought to you in cooperation with one of my new favorite apps, which is Blinkist. Now, I'm betting that you are watching this video because you're like me. You want to learn new stuff all the time. And that way, when you walk past a bookstore, I certainly do, I look at all of those kind of non-fictional books thinking, I would love to have the time to read all of those, but I just cannot find any time to do so. This is where Blinkist is genius, right? They've had people reading through all of those non-fictional books, kind of condensing them down to the essentials, what those books are really about, and then they're delivering it to you in kind of an audiobook format, which you can listen to in about 15 to 20 minutes. So you can get the gist out of all of those books, which means you can consume an enormous amount of books and knowledge. Now, the first 100 of you who are quick enough to use this link will get 1 week absolutely for free with Blinkist, where you can check it out and see if what I'm telling you is true. And you'll also get 25% off the membership fee after that week. So go down, click it, and let's start learning. Right, so the news last autumn was that Airbus had for the first time overtaken Boeing as the world's biggest aircraft manufacturer. Now, this obviously stands on the back of the 737 MAX catastrophe that Boeing is still reeling from. Airbus had an enormous amount of orders last year. Boeing, not so much. So what is actually stopping Airbus from just kind of stepping in, taking over control, and creating a monopoly out of the current duopoly that the aircraft manufacturing world is? Well, it turns out there are a couple of things. Now, I've been talking about 3 of those today. So the first is the absolute biggest one, which is the enormous backlog that already exists at both Airbus and Boeing. So during 2008, when the global recession hit, what happened was that the central banks all around the world started lowering interest rates, okay? And with those lower interest rates, it became much cheaper for the likes of, bigger airlines to buy new aircraft. Because remember, buying an aircraft is done to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. And of course, a small change in interest rate will make a huge difference in the costs of those airlines or the leasing companies that buys these aircraft. So during 2010 and the following decade, there was also a big shift in how people were traveling. So while the older generations tend to favor owning stuff, buying stuff, the newer generation, the millennials, are more interested in traveling, in adventures. Now, those things combined made sure that the airlines realized that there's a huge potential for traveling. There's a huge potential for expansion. So let's use these lower interest rates and let's buy bucket loads of aircraft. And that's what they did. So during 2010 and the following decade, there was an influx of aircraft orders that have never been seen before. It's been the absolute biggest decade ever in aircraft manufacturing history. But the problem then becomes that there are so many orders, but it takes a long while for an aircraft manufacturer like Boeing, but also like Airbus, to manufacture these aircraft. At the moment, Airbus is increasing their capacity. They have 4 centers where their final assembly lines lies now. It's of course Toulouse, which is their home base. It is Hamburg in Germany. It's Tianjin in China, and it's Mobile, Alabama in the US. And they're trying to churn out as many Airbus 320s as possible, because the big bulk of all of these orders were for the single-aisle Airbus 320, 321. But while they're doing this, they can still only muster to get out about 65 aircraft a month. And because of the past decade, their orders, the orders that they need to fulfill, is about 6,600. Okay, so this means that if you go into Airbus today and say, hi, I won the lottery, I would like to buy myself a brand new Airbus 320 with all of the little nits and gadgets in it, when can I get it? Airbus will say, that's great, we're going to be looking at different engine alternatives for you. 2029, it'll be yours. And you'll say, but that's in 9 years, I want to go now. And they'll say, unfortunately, that's not possible. In order for you to do that, you're going to have to lease an aircraft in from someone or solve it some other way. We cannot give you an aircraft until in about 9 years. Okay? Now, here lies, of course, the big issue with switching orders from Boeing, because Boeing has a similar backlog. They also have thousands of jets in the backlog, but if you want to switch your order, if you want to cancel your 737 MAX order and switch it over to an Airbus, well, then you will become in the back of the line. While if you're in the line for a MAX, at least you know when that MAX is going to arrive. Okay, the fact that it's grounded now will have an impact. It does have an impact on many, many airlines today, but if you are delayed 1 year, it's still better than being delayed 9 years. So this is the huge difference. This is why Boeing's customers are not just rushing over to Airbus. It will, however, mean that Airbus is securing future orders, which means that they will be able to continue to grow as Boeing might have to kind of slip down a little bit. But this is also very important to remember. When you buy an aircraft, you pay a relatively small upfront fee, okay? The bulk of the money is being paid when you get the aircraft. So this means that if you buy an aircraft now, or if you buy 50 aircraft now, you do have to pay some money. But if there is a change in the economy, if the economy slumps, if something happens, if flight shaming becomes a real big thing, or something else, a big war or something breaks out, you can cancel those orders, and the only thing that you would have lost is that down payment that you've made. Right? So this means that even if there are thousands of aircraft on order, it doesn't necessarily mean that the aircraft manufacturers can bank all of that money. Okay? So there is a way, there's definitely a way for Boeing to come back. Once the 737 MAX is up and running again, they can probably give discounts to their more loyal customers, and they can start wheeling in orders again and kind of fix this lost year that 2019 was for Boeing. So that's number one, the backlog. And on top of that, Airbus have also had problems on actually delivering on the schedule that they put up. So while they have said that they're going to deliver 63 aircraft per month, they've actually had problems with that. And of course now, with the outbreak of the coronavirus, they've had to shut down the production line in Tianjin, which means that the 63 is probably going to drop to even less than that, which will further delay the deliveries of existing customers. And this has been a real issue. This summer in the Paris Air Show, where Willie Walsh went out and bought new 737 MAXes, even though they were still grounded, he actually cited the delays in Airbus delivery as one of the reasons why he stayed and wanted to expand his relationship with Boeing rather than with Airbus. So the customers are not happy with the delays that are coming out of Airbus. Okay, the second reason has to do with type ratings of pilots and training of engineers and spare parts. So if you are an existing Boeing customer and you're flying the next generation jets, the ones that I am flying, and now you have bought loads and loads of 737 MAX aircraft, you probably did so because Boeing promised you that you wouldn't have to train your pilots more than an iPad course, and then those pilots would be able to jump straight into the 737 MAX and fly on them. Okay. Now, what's happened in the last few months is that the FAA and Boeing themselves have come out and said, well, it's likely going to be a little bit of simulator training, right? That's a big downside for Boeing. Boeing is not happy with that, but still, it's probably only going to be 1 or 2 sessions that will be required, which is the pilots being taken offline 1 to 2 days. And that's what we are doing anyway. So we're doing recurrent training as part of our yearly training cycle as pilot. And if the airlines have access to a 737 MAX simulator, that training could be done as part of the biannual pilot training. So it still wouldn't net any losses for the airline. All right, at least not significant ones. But if the airline would be so frustrated with the 737 MAX grounding that they decide, nope, I'm going to stop my orders with Boeing, I'm going to go Airbus instead, well then it's a whole new ball game. It means that all of the pilots that will now fly on the new Airbus rather than the Boeing will have to go in and do what's called a type rating course. Now, type rating course consists of some ground school where you learn all of the systems of the aircraft, and then on top of that you have to do some quite serious simulator training where you learn how to operate the aircraft safely, how to deal with all the malfunctions, and then at the end there's a skill test where you actually get that rating into your license. That process for trained pilots takes between 1.5 to 2 months to do. And if you are an airline and you have to take half of your fleet of pilots offline for 2 months while you still have to pay them while they're doing their retraining onto the new type, that is an enormous cost. And on top of that, you have to retrain your engineers, you have to restock with spares for a new aircraft type. And if you are going to be operating with both Airbus and Boeing, you now have 2 different engineering teams, you have 2 different teams of pilots, 2 different sets of simulators needed, and the complexity and the cost just goes on and on and on. And this is the reason why the existing Boeing customers that are watching now this 737 MAX debacle going on for a year, stretching into 1.5 years, that's why they're not just jumping ship over to Airbus, because they know that the 737 MAX is likely to be certified, might take more months than they were hoping for, but at the end, the MAX will be flying. The pilots will be trained onto the MAX, and it will have a financial impact, but not as great as it would be if they just switched over to a completely new aircraft type. So this is what you have to understand, right? It is not easy to make a switch from one aircraft type to another. But once again, if you are a new airline, or you're an existing airline that is thinking about expanding into a new type of operation, like long haul, for example, well, in that case, there's nothing stopping you from choosing Airbus over Boeing when it comes to this new operation, because that will incur these kind of training costs and these kind of engineering costs anyway. And this is obviously where Boeing stands a big risk at the moment. That is that the airlines are losing confidence in them, and that they will, for the future orders, for future market share, that they will start losing on that. And that is a real risk, right? Number 3, and here is where the trade wars are coming in. Here's where the tariffs are coming in. So little known to the public is the fact that Airbus very recently lost a court battle that's been going on for about 15 years when it comes to illegal state aid. The World Trade Organization decided in favor of Boeing here. They said that yes, Airbus has received unfair state aid, and it allowed Boeing and America to impose tariffs on Airbus for Airbuses that are being imported into the United States. This is one of the reasons why Airbus is now increasing the production rate in their Mobile, Alabama factory, because Airbuses that are being manufactured inside of the United States are not being affected by these tariffs. But trade wars, tariffs, are a huge obstacle to changes when it comes to big aircraft orders. Because if you impose a 10% tariff, I'm just taking that out of the air, but let's say it's a 10% tariff. If you put a 10% tariff on an aircraft that's costing $120 million, that's a huge increase in costs. And the airlines are very, very keen to keep their costs down. This is one of the reasons why the Airbus A320neo was so effective, because it was about the same price. I think it was a little bit more expensive than the 737, but of course it was extremely, extremely efficient and much cheaper to operate. So cost is a huge deal, and these trade wars that's happening, these tariffs that are being imposed, obviously makes, as it always does, the market more rigid, less prone to big changes. And this is also a reason why Airbus just can't kind of step in and take over the market. So what will happen in the future then? Well, it's very, very hard to say, okay? It's definitely been a very, very bad year for Boeing. And Boeing is suffering from a loss in confidence. And this is a significant issue when it looks into the future. So Boeing is going to have to, most likely, start looking into developing of new aircraft types. And this is why the 777X and the kind of success of the 777X is so crucial for Boeing. Because it's a way for them to show that, yeah, we are still the good old aircraft manufacturer, the reliable aircraft manufacturer that we've always been. This is a side note. We will be working on improving what caused this, but you can rely on us. And if Boeing can be seen to do that, if they can come with new innovative designs that will please the markets and will please the airlines, well then I don't think that this necessarily is going to be more than a huge hiccup for Boeing. But If they don't, if they keep trying to use all aircraft types, to not come with any innovation, and if the 737 MAX debacle continues, well then the kind of reputational risks to Boeing is huge, and Airbus will, step by step, take over more and more of the market. As they can increase their delivery schedule, as they can increase the amount of factories they have, if they can take market share, they will. So we might see Airbus starting to become more and more dominant. That's possible. But we've also seen that in the duopoly that exists at the moment, where you have Airbus and Boeing, they have been kind of overtaking each other more and more, depending on what kind of aircraft types that they can churn out. So if Boeing comes with something completely revolutionary, well then they might be very quickly finding themselves back on top again. Now that's what I had, guys. Thank you very much for watching. Remember to subscribe to the channel and click that notification bell if you like this kind of content. Now, let's head over to the Mentor Aviation app, all right? I always do that after my release of my videos so that I can discuss what you think about the episode, if you have any questions to follow up on it, or if you just want to hang out with other aviation enthusiasts, it's a great place to do so. So let's head over to the app, have an absolutely fantastic day, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Right, guys, I really hope that you liked that. If you want more content like that, more aviation content, well then, check this out. I hope that you have subscribed to the channel and that you've highlighted the little notification bell. See you inside of the Mentor Aviation app, and have an absolutely fantastic day. Bye-bye.
Hi everybody, very welcome to Mentor and yet another video podcast. As always, I hope you're doing absolutely fantastic. Today on the video, guys, Storm Ciara has been raging absolute havoc all over Northern Europe. You've seen some crazy approaches, some landings, and also some go-arounds. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Why is it that sometimes an aircraft will be taking off again after it seems like they're safely down on the ground? But first of all, we're going to talk about the new sub to transonic speed record over the Atlantic that was set by a British Airways Boeing 747 the other day. So stay tuned.
Wind 31016, everyone right, right on. Circle line at 31. Delta 26. Yes, sir, dude.
Right, guys, so the reason I'm doing this video is because I am being inundated with messages on Twitter, which I'm hoping that you're following by now, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and of course the Mentor Aviation app. And they're all asking pretty much the same questions. The most common questions have been, how come that a transonic aircraft like the Boeing 747 can fly quicker than the speed of sound over the Atlantic? Wouldn't that be dangerous? Wouldn't it, go over their maximum speed? What about when they're going into a jet stream or out of a jet stream? Wouldn't they potentially hurt the airframe when they do that? We're going to be talking about that, but we're also going to be talking about the approaches that you see during these kind of severe storms. How is it that the pilots can actually decide to go around, even though it seems like they have been safely touched down already on the runway? But if we start with the new transonic speed record over the Atlantic. So a British Airways Boeing 747 managed to cross the Atlantic in only 4 hours and 56 minutes, which is an amazing speed, all right? The reason they were able to do that was because they used the help of an atmospheric phenomenon called a jet stream. So jet streams are very narrow bands of high speed winds that normally during the winter there tends to be two jet streams, the one up in the north, the Arctic jet stream, and then the one that's going further down south. And the quickest one is always the one up in the north. These jet streams are formed because there are different masses of air, hotter air and colder air. So the polar air, where that meets up with the slightly warmer air down south, it creates the required changes in both pressure and temperature in order to produce these high winds. And the fact that the Earth is rotating makes them always go from west to east. So there are always westerly winds in these jet streams. This is why you never see one of these speed records being done the other way, when it's going from the UK to America. It's always been done when it comes from America to the UK, and it has to do with the direction of these jet streams. So
So the aircraft, the 747 in this case, would have climbed into the jet stream somewhere over the coastline of America, over the Atlantic. And initially, the passengers would have felt some buffeting, some turbulence. But it wouldn't necessarily have been that bad. And as the aircraft climbs into the core of the jet stream, since there's not much different wind speeds rubbing up against each other, since the wind is very homogeneous there wouldn't have been much turbulence during the actual crossing. And then as the aircraft is descending out of the jet stream, there might have been some turbulence again. But like I was saying, it's not like the wind change is coming like this. There would be what would be perceived as a constant increase in speed as the aircraft is coming out of the jet stream into slower air, because the kind of movement, the inertia of the aircraft is still moving very fast, and as it moves into slower moving air, it would be like an increase of headwind and an increase of indicated airspeed. So to a certain extent, you have to be a little bit careful when you descend out of or climb into these jet streams. You have to monitor your speed very, very carefully, because you can have fairly sudden changes of indicated airspeed. But to answer the question that I've been asked, whether or not it's dangerous and whether or not they're increasing speeds above their maximum airspeeds, the answer to that is no, they're not. In fact, while we're in the jet stream, when we're traveling with it, in the cockpit, everything looks exactly normal. So if you think about it like if you're traveling on a boat, right? The actual speed of the boat, as in the speed that the boat is pushing through the water, is going to be the same if it's going upstream or downstream. But if you're looking at it from the banks of the river, it will look like the boat is going much, much quicker when it's going downstream than it's going upstream. And it's the same kind of principle when the aircraft are flying in a jet stream. So the indicated airspeed that the pilots are seeing is the same as it always is. On a Boeing 747, they will probably be cruising at a Mach number of 0.80, 0.81, somewhere like that. And that hasn't changed whether they're in the jet stream or they're outside of the jet stream. What does change is the ground speed. So that's the speed relative to the water underneath them. And that doesn't, from an aerodynamic point of view, doesn't have any kind of effect, okay? The only effect that has is how quickly they get from A to B, which is why the newspapers are making a huge deal of the fact that they now have a new speed record. But the pilots didn't do anything out of the ordinary, and they were basically just lucky that they managed to get into a pocket of air that was moving so fast that they could break this speed record, right? So, except for the fact that you have to be a little bit careful when you climb into and descend out of a jet stream, there is nothing dangerous with a crossing of that speed. Now, I did have some questions as well about what happens if you turn up at the gate at a busy airport 2 hours before you're supposed to be there. And that's a great question, actually. It will cause a little bit of problems for ground staff if an aircraft coming into Heathrow, for example, is turning up 2 hours before they're supposed to be there, because the gate that they should have been allocated might already be occupied at that point. So there is a possibility that these passengers might have had to sit and wait on the taxiway until the gate is clear, or most likely they will be allocated a new gate and the passengers that are going outbound will get a gate change announcement. So that's most likely what will happen. Now, the other questions that I've received is, what about the other way then? If the speed was 4 hours and 56 minutes going over the Atlantic from America to the UK, what about the poor ones that had to go the other way? And that's true. They would have had a much, much longer flight, probably more than 2 hours longer than that. But the thing with jet streams is that they're fairly localized, they're small, so there is a possibility to fly either above them or below them, or even to some extent on the sides of them. And when the flight planning department is looking into this, they will be looking into, is there a possibility to go outside of this very, very strong headwind as they're flying over the Atlantic? And if there is, they will. So you can utilize the maximum speed of the jet stream when you're going with the wind, with tailwind, but you can also try to avoid the jet stream to a certain extent if you are going against the wind. So they wouldn't have managed to be, to completely avoid the effects of the jet stream. It would have been a very, very long flight going the other direction.
But providing that they're flying an aircraft like, for example, the 747, which has a huge range, it's not an issue, right? They will take as much fuel as it's needed to fly those extra hours that it will take, and they will still have enough fuel for their diversion if they need to when they get to their destination, and their minimum final reserve fuel. You can never dispatch with less than that. So those of you who asked, well, what about if you run out of fuel? That doesn't happen. If a flight is planned to fly a certain distance, the flight planning department will always look at what kind of winds do we have, what are the atmospheric conditions, and make sure that you can carry as much fuel as you need. If you can't, if you're flying an aircraft that doesn't have the endurance to fly for those extra hours, well, then the flight will be cancelled or it will be moved to a different time when it is safe to do so. Everything that has to do with aviation, guys, is about safety, and it is not happening by chance. We don't go for a flight and just hope that we'll get to our destination. No, that's not how it works. It is all very carefully planned before we ever depart, so don't worry about that. Now, the Storm Ciara also caused a lot of tricky conditions during landing and during takeoff. I've done several videos on that, right? So if you're interested, I'm going to link to the videos up here, both how to do a crosswind takeoff correctly from a pilot's perspective and also how to do a crosswind landing, because there are quite some techniques to it. But what I want to talk about today is the concept of stabilized approaches. So the pilots coming in during crosswind conditions like this, or during windy conditions like this, first of all, in their briefing, before they even started descent, they would have briefed about the different techniques that they would have to use and the threats that comes with very gusty conditions. We also adjust our approach speed. So if we have very gusty conditions, we increase the approach speeds to have a lot of margin in case we would have a sudden increase in speed during the approach, or a decrease in speed because of the gust in the winds. Okay, but then as we're flying the approach, normally during the initial part of the approach is not really an issue. The turbulence will come as we get lower down, because that's when the wind catches buildings or small hills and start creating these kind of rotors that creates the very bad turbulence that you can get sometimes. And now it is over to the pilots to actually make sure that the aircraft is safely flying within all of their parameters during the approach. So the pilot flying will be concentrating on flying the aircraft. That's done either by autopilot, but if it's really severe, we probably disconnect the autopilot a bit earlier in order to feel the aircraft properly. Okay? The pilot monitoring has a hugely important job here, because the pilot monitoring will be monitoring all of the instrumentation, making sure that we do not exceed our approach speed, for example. If we do that, we might get flap blowback, so that the flap will start to retract in order to protect themselves from structural damage. And if that happens, we have to go around. It's mandatory to do so. But also that the speed doesn't drop too low, so that we approach our stall speed. We also have to make sure that we're staying in the slot, as in that we're flying within 1 dot localizer and 1 dot glide slope. And that's just to make sure that we don't suddenly become too high or too low on approach. Together with that, we also have rules about how much or how little thrust we can have for a prolonged period of time. So there's a lot of different things that the pilot monitoring has to look at when we're flying in tricky conditions like this. And at any time, if either the pilot flying or the pilot monitoring feels like, no, I don't like this, I don't feel like I have control, or we're outside of our stabilized criteria, any one of them can call go around. And the other pilot will respond appropriately. Right? So if the pilot monitoring, who might or might not be the first officer or the captain, calls, no, go around, the pilot flying only executes the go around. There's no question why, there's nothing like that. You execute the go around, which is the safest thing to do, and then afterwards you can talk about what the reason was. But it's most likely that the pilot monitoring will see something that the pilot flying does not see, because he or she is so concentrated on getting the aircraft down to land. Right? So when can you do a go-around then? Well, you can do a go-around at any stage during the approach before you've selected the thrust reverses, right? So if you feel during the initial part of the approach that something is wrong, you get a master caution warning or something like that, you can stop the approach at that point. During the intermediate and low part of the approach, you can go around whenever you feel like there is a reason to do so. And after landing, you can still go around, providing that you haven't selected the thrust reversers. And the reason that the thrust reverser is the cutoff point is because it will take so long for the thrust reversers to stow themselves, for the thrust reverser locks to go into the position, and for the engine to spool up, that if you're down on the ground and you've selected the thrust reversers and you select full thrust again, it's going to take you anything up to maybe 30-40 seconds before you can start to get thrust back on the engine. And at that point you will have decelerated so much and you will have used so much runway that it wouldn't be safe for you to try to go around again. So if you touch down, which we saw some examples of during Storm Ciara the other day, if you touch down and the pilots feel that no, I don't like this, the aircraft is going towards the going towards the side of the runway, or I'm not fully in control, you just press toga, go around, flap 15, set go around thrust, very carefully rotate so that you don't hit the tail, because that is a threat in this case, and then you go around and you do a second attempt. Now, of course, for you, the passengers in back, if you feel that you've touched down and all of a sudden it goes up again, especially after a really, really turbulent approach, it's going to feel very, very bad. But remember that the pilots are only acting on safety. Right? If they feel that this is the safest course of action, this is what they would do, this is what they're trained to do, and pilots knows that there is a no blame policy for go around. This means that they do not have to answer up to why they did a go around. It's considered from an airline's point of view to be the safest option if they decide to go through with that. All right? Good. So the pilots are not going to be punished for doing a go around. That will never happen. The airlines will always assume that that was the best and the safest course of action. Okay? So that's why you will see these things. Now, if you guys are interested in seeing how a go-around is done from inside of the cockpit, I actually have done, in the Mentor Aviation app, I've done a Cat 3 approach and go-around collection. So you can go in, you can get the Cat 3 approach and go-around, you can use your smartphone, look around in the cockpit as I'm doing the whole approach, I'm doing the go-around and also doing the landing from a Cat 3. That's a fog landing. And if you have one of these, which is a Google Cardboard headset, and you can put your phone inside. If you do, then you'll be able to switch over to VR mode, and it will feel just like you're sitting inside of the cockpit together with me and my first officer when I do these exercises. And I have many, many more. I do a full setup from when it's cold and dark until it's ready to taxi. There is wind shear escape maneuvers, there's TCAS avoidance, there is engine failure after takeoff. All of that you can get inside of the Mentor Aviation app, but you can also get it absolutely for free, not pay anything, and just be part of the community. So that's it, guys. If you have any more questions, as always, put them in below, or you can contact me on Twitter or Instagram. I don't know if you noticed it, but I've started to do some Instagram TV posts as well. Now, those are videos that I might not want to send out on the YouTube channel for whatever reason, like more personalized videos when I go out traveling and things like that. So follow me on Instagram if you haven't already. There are links to follow me on all of these social media here in the description. Have an absolutely fantastic day, and remember, subscribe, okay? And put the little notification bell on if you haven't already, because otherwise you might miss these special videos that I do from time to time. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you next time. Right, guys, I really hope that you liked that. If you want more content like that, more aviation content, well then, check this out. I hope that you have subscribed to the channel and that you've highlighted the little notification bell. See you inside of the Mentor Aviation app, and have an absolutely fantastic day. Bye-bye. Hi everybody, very welcome to Mentor and yet another video podcast. As always, I hope you're doing absolutely fantastic. Today on the video, guys, flying wings and mixed body wing concepts like the new Airbus prototype Maverick. Is this the future of civil aviation? And if it is, why haven't we already seen variations of this carrying passengers? Stay tuned.
Wind 31016, everyone right? Right on right. Turn line 31. Delta 26. Reduce.
This video is brought to you in cooperation with NordVPN. Now, if you are like me, you spend a lot of times on public Wi-Fi, like maybe on airports or in hotels or on restaurants, and if you do, your data is at risk. There's always a chance that someone with malicious intent is sitting there trying to swipe off your browser data or your passwords. So what you need is a good VPN service, and NordVPN is a good VPN service. They have thousands of servers located all around the globe, which will make sure that your VPN service is not lagging and is as quick as possible. And if you use it, you will have up to 6 devices that you can use on a single login. So you can use your smart TV, your iPhone, your laptop on the same login. Now, if you're quick and you use this link here below, which is nordvpn.org/pilot, or the coupon code PILOT, you will get a whopping 7% off the normal fee of NordVPN, and you'll get 1 month for free. And if you're really quick, you might be able to catch their birthday deal, which is when you sign up to a 3-year plan, they will gift you either 1 month, 1 year, or 3 years for free when you sign up. So check it out. All right, so I hope that you've been following the aviation news during the last few weeks. If you have the Mentor Aviation app, you will get both pushes and you'll get aviation news updates every day. And if you have, you would have seen that Airbus have come out with a radical new concept called the Maverick. Now, the Maverick is not a pure flying wing, but it's a mixed body wing concept, okay? So flying wings has been around and has been thought about by aircraft engineers from the dawn of aviation. If you go back to as early as 1910, you had people like G.W. Dunn or Hugo Juncker, who was experimenting with flying wings. And then during the 1930s and 1940s, you had some military adaptations as well. And then, of course, that kind of edged out into what we all know as the iconic B-2 bomber, which is, in my view, one of the most pretty aircraft that has ever existed. But that's only military aircraft. We haven't really seen them as a civilian aircraft. Is there a reason for that? Well, first of all, the flying wing, as it is, the flying wing, the pure flying wing concept, it lacks a horizontal and vertical stabilizer. So it uses only the wing. And the benefit of that is that you get lower drag because of lower surface area, but also because the whole body and wing can be used to generate lift. But because you don't have a vertical and horizontal stabilizer, it also means that your ability to move the center of gravity of the aircraft decreases quite a lot. In a conventional aircraft that looks like a tube, the one that you know, the stabilizer, the horizontal stabilizer, will allow the aircraft to move the weight, fuel, passengers walking around, things like that, without it having any kind of problem stability-wise. But in a flying wing, since you don't have a horizontal stabilizer, that is actually part of your elevon, which is at the back side of the wing. It means that that area that the aircraft can kind of, tolerate movement of the center of gravity becomes much, much smaller. So that's one of the issues. Other issues is that it has always been inherently unstable. Since it doesn't have a rudder to help it during the turns, every time it turns, you need some kind of sophisticated drag device on the downward wing in order to make sure that the aircraft is actually turning and not just banking, right? But that's the flying wing. The concept that Airbus came out with looks different, right? The Maverick is not a flying wing. It's a combined wing and body aircraft concept. And that is a different thing, all right? That will actually take the benefits of the flying wing, which is to enable the aircraft body to generate lift, hence have less drag. And it will also be able to place the engines above the aircraft rather than below the wings. And since it does that, it means that you'll be able to fit much larger, much more efficient, ultra-high bypass engines to the aircraft. So there are some really obvious benefits. The aerodynamic air benefits are probably between 20 and 30%, and it's, you know, that's a lot when it comes to drag. But I think that the real major benefit is going to be the possible implementation of future engine technologies to this. Okay, so there are some really glaring obvious benefits, but what are the challenges? Why haven't we already seen this? We know that NASA has been working on it for several years. We know Boeing has had a similar concept. Airbus is obviously working on it right now. So why isn't it already flying? Well, there are a few things that we need to talk about. So the first thing that I want to talk about is the pressurization. All right. There's a reason that aircraft that you're flying and the aircraft that you're thinking about at the moment are formed as a cylinder. And that's because when we're flying at high altitude, we need to be able to pressurize the aircraft for you guys to be able to breathe. It's a good thing. When you have a cylinder that you pressurize, the pressure inside will be acting evenly on the entire cylinder. So it is easy to build a pressure cylinder that can be fairly lightweight. But in the case of a blended wing body concept, the body is more like a box. And when you have a box, it means that if you pressurize the box, you're going to have different amount of pressure acting on different parts of that box. So previously, that has been really, really hard to do. You can do it. It requires a lot of materials. It becomes very heavy, and that negates the whole benefit of the flying wing. But now, with the onset of new types of materials, composites, fiberglass, things like that, it is now possible to build a box that can withstand the differential pressures that we need in order to fly at the altitudes of maybe 45,000 feet. So this means that recent kind of technology breakthroughs in how we make aircraft can enable us to make completely, radically new designs like the blended wing concept. Okay, so that's number one. Number two is a little bit more interesting, and that's the fact that when we're flying in a tube, like we're doing now, it means that all passengers are kind of sitting very close to the different axes, to the roll axis, for example. When the aircraft is rolling, you're sitting very close to the center of the aircraft, and the same as when you're yawing. If you're sitting in a box and you're kind of going out into the wings where you're sitting as a passenger, it means that those who are sitting at the far outer ends of this is going to feel a little bit different. I'll put it like that. When the aircraft is yawing, for example, while you're kind of feeling that you're yawing like this in the middle, at the outer side, you're going to be moving a little bit backward as the aircraft is yawing. You know, so there are some changes. Now, they might be very, very small, but the problem with those kind of movements is that it can cause nausea, okay? So flight sickness, which is something that the aircraft designers is going to have to think about when they create seating inside of the aircraft. Another thing that is also going to be potentially causing nausea is that it's going to be very hard to make actual physical windows in a design like this. You will be able to do them, potentially, but the problem is that since you're sitting in a box, it's likely that the windows is going to be more in the ceiling than next to you. Now, this can be sorted by not having windows at all and putting virtual windows in instead. So you'll be looking into a screen, and on the screen you can go through the in-flight entertainment and choose to see, for example, you know, the left wing or the right wing or whatever you feel like. Now, this is possible to do, but it requires that there is a very, very good video feed, right? There cannot be any lag in the time it takes for the aircraft to start turning and to you seeing it on the screen. And the reason for that is that the brain will feel that you're moving. And if you're watching something, if you're watching like your own wing and your body, your brain is interpreting that as you seeing the wing, if the wing starts turning or moving without the video feed doing this, and we're talking milliseconds here, there will be a disconnect, and the brain will interpret that into nausea. This is the problem with early adaptations of virtual reality headsets, for example. And even in the flight simulators that we use, when we're taxiing on the ground, there is just a slight delay in the movement and what you see. And anytime that happens, you can become instantly nauseous, right? So this is going to be an issue, but there are easy and technical solutions to that, right? Right, so next thing is going to be to adapt existing infrastructure. And what I mean by that is taxiways, runways, but especially loading, unloading, and things like air bridges, for example. So the way that the blended wing body concept has been presented is that it looks like it's going to be easily inside of the 80-meter box that you need to have. For example, the 777X is inside that, the 747 and the Airbus 380, which is the maximum size of aircraft that you can use on taxiways. Right? So it looks like that's not going to be an issue. What's going to be more interesting is how to adapt, for example, the air bridges. Since you're not connecting the air bridge onto the side of a cylinder, you're now kind of attaching it to the front of a wing or potentially from below. So this is also technical challenges that can be fairly easily adapted to, but they need to be thought through, right? Same when it comes to loading equipment or loading cargo. All of that is something that's going to have to be made in the beginning only for these type of aircraft, and that will come with a significant cost. So it is something that they have to think about. When we're on the subject of entering and exiting the aircraft, we also have to think about things like emergency exits. So today and tomorrow, when this aircraft is going to be available to us, the rule states that you need to be able to evacuate the aircraft completely using half of the available exits in less than 90 seconds. So these new flying wings or blended wing body concepts need to adhere to that as well. So this means that instead of having emergency exits along a tube like we're used to now, it's likely going to be emergency exits maybe in the floor, maybe towards the front, maybe towards the top. But they still need to be able to do this using half of the available emergency exits. And since the passengers are now sitting spread out, that might actually become easier depending on how the emergency exits are being construed. But it's definitely, all of these are new ways of thinking about flying an aircraft. We've been doing it the same way for 100 years now. And this is going to be a new way of looking at it, which doesn't mean that it's going to be a worse situation. It just means that we need to readapt the current rules and regulations and infrastructure to suit this new type of aircraft, right? But it also comes with significant benefits. Not only the fact that it will be more efficient, which we do need now. The aviation industry needs to look at the environmental impacts that we have. Obviously, it's going to be much cheaper for the airlines to drive the aircraft if they're more fuel efficient. But also you'll have the possibilities to rearrange seating, for example. So in a box concept like this, you could, for example, have seats hanging from the ceiling, as well as sitting on the floor, which means that you could potentially seat more passengers, or even have it so that the passengers could create flat beds or almost flat beds, even if you're in an economy seating, which would be very, very cool, right? I've seen some concepts of that, which looks amazing, to say the least. But I think the single major benefit, the single biggest benefit here, is probably going to be the fact that with this concept, you can start to put the engines on top of the aircraft. This means that you'll be able to create much bigger engines. Ultra-high bypass engines will be able to be fitted, and the ground clearance is not going to be an issue, having the engines under the wings. Now they're sitting at the back as part of the vertical stabilizers, and with that we will be able to really fully utilize new engine technology, which we will have to do, right? New engines are going to have to come, they're going to have to be radically more efficient than the ones we have now, and the current aircraft design does not really allow for much of that. So new design is needed. So will we see this then? I think the answer to that is yes. I think that within the next 15 to 20 years, we will start to see some type of this concept coming out. And if that turns out to be radically more efficient, which I assume it will be, then it's likely that we are going to start to see a shift towards this type of aircraft in the, on the medium kind of time horizon. We're talking 20, 30 years or something like that. So I don't think that you will see it tomorrow. I don't think that you'll see it in 2025, but in 2030, 2040, it's likely that we'll see some around. And I, for one, is really, really positive when it comes to new developments. I think we have to move this way. I think that it's the only way to kind of deal with the challenges that humanity is facing right now. We need to innovate ourselves out of it. We cannot go backwards. We need to go forward. And the only way to do that is to think outside of the box and actually create some new stuff, which is what this new Maverick concept actually is. So I think it's great. I think that we should keep working on it. And I hope to be able to fly one myself before I retire. It would be very, very cool. Right, guys, that's it. Thank you very much for watching. As always, guys, I hope to see you inside of the Mentor Aviation app where we can discuss this. I'm actually going to create a new forum where you can go in and discuss what you think is going to be the aircraft of the future. So come inside of the app. It's completely free to download. You have the link to download the app down here, and you can participate in the forums where we discuss different technical stuff and different things about aviation or flight training, or you can just come into the chat and talk to me and hang out and talk about regular things with aviation enthusiasts, people who are afraid of flying, and professional pilots like myself. Or you can get yourself a collection where you can get up to 2 hours of me instructing you how to fly the 737, things like engine failures after takeoff, how to set up the 737 from when it's black until it is ready to taxi, and many, many more things. So see you inside of the Mentor Aviation app. Have an absolutely fantastic day, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Right, guys, I really hope that you liked that. If you want more content like that, more aviation content, well then, check this out. I hope that you have subscribed to the channel and that you've highlighted the little notification bell. See you inside of the Mentor Aviation app and have an absolutely fantastic day. Bye-bye. Hi everybody, very welcome to Mentor and yet another video podcast. As always, I hope you're doing absolutely fantastic. Today is a very somber day as we bid farewell to one of the largest short-haul airlines in Europe, Flybe. Flybe has just announced that they're going into administration. Why has this happened, and why did it happen right now, and what's going to happen? Stay tuned.
Wind 31016, everyone right, going all right. Start land 31. Delta 26,
So, this morning, the 5th of March 2020, we were given the very sad information from the headquarters of Flybe that they were going into administration. Now, what that means is that it's going into something that's very close to bankruptcy. It means that all of the aircraft are now staying on the ground. There will be no more flying by Flybe. The stocks have stopped trading, and basically all of its employees are now, maybe not exactly today, but very soon, out of a job. So what has led up to this? Well, Flybe has been, to a large extent, a very successful airline. It started back in 1979 as Jersey International Airways, and it flew a lot of different types during its existence, including the 737-300, I believe, the short 360, the Embraer 195, and now the Embraer 175, and the backbone of the operation has been the Dash Q400. So they started, as kind of the name initiated, in Jersey, but it has been largely operated for the last few years out of its base in Exeter, and it also has bases in Birmingham and Manchester. And the way that the route network structure has looked has been a lot of the domestic flights within the UK. So they haven't concentrated on flying into and out of the major hubs like Heathrow and Stansted, but rather the slightly smaller airports and the really small airports up in Scotland, out on the Channel Island, and in Northern Ireland. Okay, so during the last few years they have been struggling. Okay, it has largely to do with the route structure, the fact that if you're flying not from the major hubs where there's continuously a lot of traffic, but from the smaller airports, then you will be very, very sensitive to the kind of seasonality of the airline business, and also to major disruptions, like for example now what we're seeing in the coronavirus. But what has really been the source of their struggles during the last few years has been the Brexit process. With all of the uncertainty that come with that, meant that the pound has been dropping like a stone. And of course, all of the incomes, if you are a domestic airline within the UK, is going to come in pounds, but a lot of your outgoings, like for example, your fuel costs, is going to be in dollars. So this means that even though you're operating the same kind of amount of passengers, well, then your earnings are dropping quite a bit. So that has been a huge problem. Flybe has been operating as an independent airline. Basically, all the time up until last year, where a consortium called Connect Airways bought them. Connect Airways is to a large extent owned by Virgin Atlantic, and Virgin Atlantic had a vision for Flybe where Flybe would become a feeder airline into the hubs of Virgin Atlantic, where then the passengers could fly out on the long-haul routes with Virgin Atlantic. The idea, I think, was to rename them into Virgin Connect or something like that. But they never really had the time to make that change, because during the autumn of 2019, it became more and more apparent that they didn't have the economy to continue to run the airline. And just before Christmas, they actually went in and asked the UK government to help them out. Now, why would the UK government help them out, you might ask? Well, the reason for that is quite simple. Flybe has been doing a huge service to the smaller regions of the United Kingdom by operating these slightly less profitable routes, but equally important for local businesses. They are today actually flying about 40% of all of the domestic routes within the UK. That's a huge number. So this means that as Flybe stops operation, 40% of all of the internal flights within the UK will cease to exist until someone will pick it up. And the question is, who is now going to pick it up? Because there are some smaller airlines within the UK who can try, but none of them as big as Flybe. And the bigger operators, they are likely not going to be interested in operating these kind of routes. They don't have the fleet to do it, and not the interest. So there was a huge interest from the UK government to help Flybe out. And what they were planning to do was to give a £100 million bridging loan to them. That would kind of bring them through this downturn, which always happens over the winter, and into the summer, where they would hopefully become profitable again. And another thing that they were discussing, which was highly, criticized, was that they would get a temporary exception from the air passenger duty, as in the APD, which is a form of tax that the UK was levying. It's an environmental tax that they were levying on domestic flights within the UK. And of course, when the UK government came in and suggested that, well, then all of the other airlines that's operating inside of the UK asked, well, if they're getting that exception, why don't we get that exception? That seems a bit unfair. And on top of that, you had environmental groups as well criticizing this, because it would send the wrong signals, basically, that the first thing that the government would kind of take away would be the environmental tax. So this was not very popular in the wider airline world. But what happened yesterday, as far as we know from what I've been able to read, is that the UK government basically decided not to give this bridging loan, which made it impossible for Flybe to continue to operate. So when that decision was made, then the leadership of Flybe went out and said that because of a commercial decision, we are going to stop operation. We go into to administration, and then we will see what comes from there. All right. Most likely, this is going to lead to Flybe disappearing. Some of its assets is going to be taken into other airlines, slots and so on. It's probably going to be taken by other airlines. But the sad truth is that there's going to be a lot of passengers whose travel is going to be disrupted. And I should say at this point that if you have planned travel with Flybe, today, do not go to the airport. They are not going to fly. Contact them or contact the airport to see what kind of information you can get. If you're flying with an airline who has operating a code share with Flybe, so part of your travel is supposed to be with them, you have to contact that airline to see if there's going to be any disruption to your travel. But like I was saying, the likely outcome of this, unfortunately, is going to be that a lot of pilots, cabin crew, ground handlers, operational assistants, people operating, planning, flight planning, and so on, is going to lose their jobs, which is hugely sad. It's similar to what happened when Thomas Cook went under last year. And the only thing that I can say is that from the bottom of my heart, I really hope that you guys who are affected by this, that you'll be able to find a new job as quickly as possible. We're all in the industry hoping that this downturn that came with the coronavirus, which is what made the situation completely unbearable for Flybe, that's going to be over soon, and that as we get into the summer, that confidence is going to return to the passengers, that the virus will be under control, that the airline business is going to start to operate on full speed again. And I really believe that within 6 to 12 months, we are going to be back up on top again to where we were just a few years back. But that's just my own opinion. Okay, I really hope that you guys will be able to sort this out, and that you don't will have to move your family away, far away from where you want to be. So that's all I had, guys. Once again, I wish the best of luck to anyone who was affected by this, be it as a passenger, but especially for the crews that were involved. And I hope that as this business tend to be able to do, that we can come together and help you guys out, that the government of the UK will do their best to help out, that all of the other airlines that are still recruiting cabin crew and pilots will do what they can to absorb you into their airlines, and that the outcome will be as good as possible for everyone out there. If you want to continue to discuss this or have questions about what happens when, to the crews, then I will probably not be able to answer those questions directly, but I'm guessing that there's a lot of people that's working for Flybe that's watching this video. So go into the comment section here, put your questions in, and I'm sure that there will be people there who will be able to answer you. And if you want to, I will be opening up the Mentor Aviation app for you. I'll create a new forum called called Flybe or something like that, and all of you, if you're working for them, you can go in there and you can discuss it. If you are out there and you have questions about what's happening, you can go in there and discuss it as well. And I'm hoping that we can come together and help each other, as we always tend to do in this community. Have as good of a day as possible, guys out there, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Right, guys, I really hope that you liked that. If you want more content like that, more aviation content, well then, check this out. I hope that you have subscribed to the channel and that you've highlighted the little notification bell. See you inside of the Mentor Aviation app, and have an absolutely fantastic day. Bye-bye. Hi everybody, very welcome to Mentor and yet another video podcast. As always, I hope you're doing absolutely fantastic. Today on the video, guys, we're going to be talking about ghost flights, but not the kind of ghost that you're thinking about. No, this is something that's even more unbelievable, so stay tuned.
Wind 31016, everyone right, set on. Start to land 31 right. Delta 260.
Right. Ghost flights. I have received a lot of questions about these kind of flights, both in the Mentor Aviation app, on mentorpilot.com, through Twitter, through Facebook, and everywhere. And everyone is equally outraged. How is it that these flights are allowed? Why can they not be stopped? Now, a ghost flight is a flight that is flown virtually empty. Okay, and it's a flight that is flown virtually empty day after day. It can be some passengers on it, sometimes there's no passengers on it, but it's very obvious that it's not a flight that is gaining any kind of money for the airline involved. So why is it flown in the first place? Well, in order to understand this, you have to understand the extraordinary situation that the airline industry is facing at the moment. With the outbreak of the Corona 2019 virus, the COVID-19, large part of the airline industry has been ruined. There are virtually no flights in and out of China. South Korea is very badly hit. And just 2 days ago, the government in Italy basically put the entire Italian country under quarantine. So from the end of this week, there's not going to be any flights into Italy, out of Italy, and very few, if any, flights operated domestically in Italy. Italy is one of the biggest markets in Europe. There's a lot of tourists going in and out of Italy. It's a lot of business travel. But even though Italy is the first country that has completely shut down its borders, this affects more than just Italy. People are nervous, they're afraid. IATA has been reporting that some airlines have up to 50% of their passengers not showing up for their flights. They're reporting declines of 26% over the entire network, and of course into Italy up to 100% decline in bookings. What this means is that the airline industry is facing something that at least I haven't seen during my 18 years. And in order to respond quickly to something like this, the airlines need to be able to reduce their flights. Okay, they need to be able to stop certain flights that are empty. They need to be acting very, very quickly. And the reason for it is because if you're not making money in the airline business, you're very quickly losing money, because flying an aircraft means paying the crew, means paying for maintenance of the aircraft, means paying for the fuel of the aircraft, for landing fees. There's a lot of money that is going out if you don't have any money coming in, right? So obviously the airlines want to quickly kind of hunker down and try to minimize the exposure to this. But here is where some regulation comes in, that creates these ghost flights. Some of the airlines in Europe, think of the biggest ones like Heathrow, Gatwick, Frankfurt, Brussels, Barcelona, Madrid, Rome. These airports are incredibly popular under normal circumstances. Everyone wants to go there. That's where the most people are. That means that that's where the most money is for the airlines. So all of the airlines want to fly into these airports. But obviously these airports have only a limited amount of runways, and there is a minimum separation between the aircraft, both during takeoff and landing. I did a video about that a few weeks ago. So there's only a certain amount of takeoff and landings that can be done every day in these major airports. And there are more airlines and more aircraft than there are slots. Slots is either a landing or a takeoff time. So in those airports, the airport and the aviation authority had to come up with a system for how to allocate these landing and takeoff times. And what they did was they created basically a marketplace for slots. So the airlines could come in and they could bid about certain slot times. Sometimes like early morning, midday, afternoon are more attractive than others, so we'll go for higher prices. But basically the slots are allocated out to people who buys them. So a single slot can be worth millions of euros, right? That works well in a economy that's working in a normal way, as in when there's loads of passengers flying, there's no problems to fill the flight. Well, then this system works beautifully. But they also had to come up with a system where if, let's say, one airline was completely dominant in one of these airports, and there was a slight downturn in the economy, for example, and this airline decided, well, actually, I'm not going to be using all of these slots that I have. There had to be a rule in place to make sure that this was not being abused, so that